John Warren and Warrant Officer Bob Ward, who with a fellow Australian Cedric Wood and New Zealander Richard Harris enlisted in their respective air forces and then volunteered to travel halfway around the globe to join the Royal Air Force in its campaign to defeat the U-boats in the Bay of Biscay. John and Bob met up early in their training and served together until the 7th of July 1944, when fate decreed that John would meet his death, but that Bob would be blown clear of the aircraft and survive, albeit with horrific injuries. Now, just to take you back briefly to the events of the 7th of July, you have a crew of 6 who were flying a Wellington, which was fitted with radar, depth charges and something called a lead light to find U-boats at night in the English Channel. This was just after D-Day, and although we think about D-Day being the 6th of June, for the Royal Air Force and obviously for the Army it was a much extended period, and the Royal Air Force were really flying maximum effort from the beginning of May through to the end of August to stop the U-boats getting up into the English Channel. Several of you will have heard of Exercise Tiger, when some E-boats got in amongst some American landing craft, and they sank a couple, and hundreds if not thousands of American servicemen died. Will you imagine if the submarines had got in amongst the invasion fleet and done something similar? And that was prevented by the Royal Navy and the Royal Air Force, from men flying from Chivenna and from Penhill and from St Evell and from bases in South Wales. The aircrew were typical of the time. Britain was not alone. We were well supported by the Dominions, and this is borne fruit by the crew. The pilot was Rhodesian. His family, we believe, came from Ukraine. They were Jewish. They moved across to Africa and settled, and Kenny Lentin joined the Royal Air Force just before the war, became a pilot, but he was Rhodesian. Frederick Phillips was from London. He was from Twickenham. He was the second pilot. Cedric Wood, John Warren and Bob Ward all came from Australia, and the other lad, Richard Harris, was from New Zealand. They took off from Fremington at about 1 o'clock in the morning, and nothing particular untoward happened until one of the engines started to malfunction. So they aborted the mission and tried to fly back to Fremington. Fremington at the Lizard in Cornwall was closed because of the weather, so they were diverted here to IF Chivenna. They made it here safely, but they had one engine which had failed. So Kenny Lentin with Frederick Phillips were trying to fly the aircraft, still heavily laden with 6 depth charges on basically one functioning engine. He was coming into an airport, an airfield, at nearly 3 o'clock in the morning, which he was unfamiliar with, in the dark, without any of the modern navigation aids that pilots expect today. And he came in over Bournemouth Burrows and tried to land on the runway, which runs parallel with the river. Unfortunately, he couldn't get the aircraft down and decided to go around. So open up the engines to try to fly around in a circuit to land back. Unfortunately, something happened, and we will never know exactly why, but they didn't manage to gain height, and they hit the field where some of you have been to at Penhill Point, and sadly it appears they slid off the end of the field, through the trees, down a 30-foot bank. The aircraft broke up with the petrol lines, the fuel lines fractured, the amount of petrol in the tanks, the hot engines, it caught fire rapidly, and then the depth charges exploded. We believe it was at that point that Bob Ward, who was sheltering behind the main spar of the Wellington, was somehow blown out, and he was the one survivor. The other 5 died at that time. The 5 who died are buried at Haycombe Cemetery in Bath, and we had the privilege of visiting there yesterday and paying our respects to the 5. But I think what's also important today is we often commemorate the deceased, and what we tend to forget are those who were wounded. And I can make it available to you all, and I hope you don't mind me saying, to David and to Jeanette, but the story of Bob, who survived, severely injured. He was taken to the hospital at Fremington, with the American hospital where the Fremington camp was, and Fremington Manor. He was then flown by air ambulance to St Athan. He had to have, his injuries were horrific. He had a lot of burns, he had skin grafts. He wasn't expected to live, but he did. And he went on to have a fulfilling life and 2 wonderful children who are here today. But we tend to think about the deceased, but let us also think about those who were wounded, and also the mental trauma that they carried with them. And just ask ourselves, and this is where I'm so grateful for Tom for being here, is you had 2 close friends, 2 Australians that came here together. One died, one lived. I will now invite the Reverend Tom to lead us in prayer.
Let's turn to God in prayer. Lord God, you are with us from our first cry to our final breath, wherever we are on this world. As we meet today to remember those killed 75 years ago, we pray for those here and elsewhere who lost loved ones in this tragic accident. While time may have diminished their grief, please continue to support and uphold those who remember those lost all those years ago. Please help them to remember your sovereign hand over all things, and continue to comfort those who still struggle with memories of those lost and with what might have been. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Lord God, we pray for those who serve in our armed forces around the world today. Please protect them as they serve to protect the nations. Guide them as they make life and death decisions. Please bless their officers with wisdom and godly insight to protect those, the lives of those in their care. Please help all of them to serve in a way that brings glory to you. As they offer their lives in service, help them and us to remember how Jesus offered his life to redeem us from the slavery of sin in order to restore us to God. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Lord God, we pray for all of those who support those who serve us now and who have served us in the past. We pray for those who counsel our veterans and for organisations like the Royal British Legion and others. Give them the right words to say to those who may have heard and seen dreadful things, and make them faithful guides to those leaving the forces. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Amen. Lord God, your Son Jesus Christ says, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God." We pray that you would guide our leaders to be those who desire peace. We pray that there would never be another conflict like World War II, and that you would spare us from the misery of remembering the deaths of young men and women taken from their families too soon. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. A prayer for the Royal Air Force, which you'll find in your orders of service. Almighty and eternal God, Lord of the universe, maker of all that is, we praise and thank you for all those who denied themselves and laid down their lives for their friends. Grant to those who are remembered here in our hearts that their names may be written in your book of life. And to us who remember them, give grace to walk in the same way of love and faith, that we may come at the last with them to that eternal kingdom where you live and reign in that perfect unity of love, one God, now and forever. Amen.
May I now invite Keith to come forward and read No Spotlight for Coastal.
This reading is a poem written by Squadron Leader Tony Spooner, Distinguished Service Order and Distinguished Flying Cross, who was a senior officer in Coastal Command. Bombers or fighters, his friends used to say. But when he said coastal, they turned half away. Yet Coastal's patrols, which traversed the bay, forced the U-boats to dive for most of the day. With the U-boats submerged for much of the day, the convoys ploughed on, midst the salt and the spray, while the men of the ships did silently pray that his plane would appear, both to circle and stay. When his plane did appear, both to circle and stay, then the wolf packs held back, wholly robbed of their prey, and the convoys sailed on in their purposeful way, and the seamen reached port where their loved ones did lay. fighters or bombers? His friends used to ask. Coastal, he said, his face a tired mask. Though not in the spotlight where others may bask, we've a tough job to do. I'm proud of the task.
May I now invite Liz?
Rob, can I just say we'll come out 2:54?
Yeah, that's okay.
We'll do that now.
Invite Liz to be for the fallen. And this, if you do know the fourth verse, to join in. Thank you.
For the Fallen by Robert Lawrence Binding. With proud thanksgiving, a mother for her children, England mourns for her dead across the sea. Flesh of her flesh they were, spirit of her spirit, fallen in the cause of the free. Solemn the drums thrill, death august and royal, sing sorrow up into immortal spheres. There is music in the midst of our desolation, and a glory that shines upon our tears. They went with songs to the battle, though young, straight of limb, true of eye, steady and aglow. They were staunch to the end against odds uncounted. They fell with their faces to the foe. They shall grow,
As we that are left grow old.
Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the